Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be getting the Brassica plot ready here at my parents' house. So the Brassicas, they're basically the cabbage plants. Brassicas is just like a general term for all cabbage plants, but it includes more than just your normal red cabbage and white cabbage. So in the Brassica family you have things like broccoli, cauliflower, curly kale, kohlrabi, things like that. Anything from that kind of background is called a Brassica. And the Brassicas, they like quite specific soil conditions, and they have quite specific pests and diseases that affect them and doesn't affect other plants. So I need to prepare this ground ready for them to make sure we get the most from them. So just over the left here, this was the previous plot where the Brassicas were. You can see them growing there. There's just a few left, but it's now early March, so there's not many left. We've eaten most of them. What we'll need to do is move this netting at some point, because there's cabbage white butterflies and pigeons that eat the Brassicas, and if without this netting they will be devastated by those pests. And you can see here some caterpillar or pigeon damage. Could also be slugs and snails as well. The other problem we get is we often get the roots attacked by something called a cabbage root fly, and that's a little fly that lays its eggs at the bottom of the stems, and the roots then get eaten off by the larvae. The larvae are like little maggots that eat away the roots. And you can see there's a collar around the base of that plant. The collar basically, it stops the cabbage root fly from laying the eggs, because what they do is they land on the stem, they cool down the stem, and then as soon as they get to the bottom of the stem where the soil is, they lay their eggs. But if there's just a little layer there to stop them getting through, like a bit of plastic or a bit of felt, they'll lay it on the felt instead of the soil, and the eggs won't be able to hatch properly and eat the Brassicas. So the main symptom of the cabbage root fly is the plants just get really weak. Sometimes go a bit of a weird purpley blue colour, and then they fall over. And you see it mostly during the warmer days that they start wilting. So hopefully that will protect against that. And the other problem we have is clubroot. That's basically a fungus in the soil that causes the roots to become all swollen, and that way the plant can't take up the nutrients it needs to. And again, very similar symptoms to the cabbage root fly. Stunts the growth, becomes wobbly, wilts in hot weather. So to combat the clubroot, what we do is we do rotation of the crops. So you can see this is where the Brassicas are growing in the previous year. This year we're going to be growing them here, where we had beans and we also had root crops. It's quite good to put Brassicas after beans, because the beans roots, they put in a lot of nitrogen through beneficial relationship with bacteria, so that the soil should be higher in nitrogen than it would be after other crops. And Brassicas like high nitrogen, as it's the leaves you're eating, and nitrogen is the main compound needed for leaf growth in plants. So that's why it's good to go after the bean crop. We've also got some roots here. So there was a lot of parsnips, that's all that's left. So I'll be filming a quick section here of me digging up these parsnips. They're just starting to grow again, so they need harvesting. If they're allowed to grow this second year, they'll flower and they'll grow woody and they won't be edible. So I'll be digging up a few of these. So first of all, I need to clear the plot, make sure there's no weeds, get rid of all the dead beans and any of the old bean poles. Also remove the parsnips as well. Then we'll be putting in ash to the soil and some compost. And the ash, what it does is it feeds the soil with plenty of potassium, which isn't too important for the Brassicas, but it also makes it more alkaline, and the alkalinity really helps to reduce the effectiveness of the clubroot. So if you have quite an acidic soil, the fungus does better and it attacks the cabbages worse. So if you can raise the pH and make it more alkaline, then you're less likely to have clubroot problems. So I'll be putting quite a lot of wood ash in here to help with that. And digging over compost to increase the organic matter. It's already quite good, this soil. It's quite a sandy soil, but there's quite a lot of organic matter. And then we've got a big pile here of manure. I think this is sheep manure with a little bit of hay mixed in. That's going to get dug into the bed as well to provide a lot more nutrients. This is quite high in nitrogen, so this will help a lot with the plants, really help them to grow nice and fast. I'll also put in some bloodfish and bone. It's a slow release fertiliser, so even though I'm putting it in at the beginning of spring, it should last most of the season. Although because we've got very sandy soil, there's a chance that some of it might leach out, so I'll probably be doing supplemental feeding as well. But that bloodfish and bone will last at least until June, give them a nice head start. And lastly, because this is a windy location and the soil is quite loose, being a sandy soil, I'll be firming down the soil as well with my feet afterwards to make sure it's nice and firm. Normally with most plants, all the other beds for example around here, we're going to keep nice and loose, because loose soil is easier for plants to grow through. The roots don't have to struggle and force their way through the really solid soil. Whereas if you have loose soil for brassicas, they can have a lot of wind rock and a lot of other issues. So with brassicas, it's pretty much probably the only plant apart from trees that I would recommend firming in quite strongly and having a more of a compacted soil. If you have clay, it's not an issue, but if it's got a loose sandy soil like this one, you really need to firm it in well. We've not had any real success the last few years with Brussel Sprouts, and they've just instead of forming nice tight buds, they've just grown into long shoots, and I'll just show you them now, see if there's any around. So this here is an example of one of the Brussel Sprouts. The problem my parents have been having in the past few years is instead of producing nice tight buttons like a normal Brussels sprout would, it's been producing these loose leaves. That's quite often a result of loose soil. You can also see this plant's fallen over and it started to grow straight again. So the soil was too loose here, the winds were too high, it's fallen over, and that's meant we haven't had any Brussels sprouts. All we've had is loose leaves, which are still nice, but they don't taste anything like Brussels. So we'll be firming in the soil as well afterwards. I'll be doing a special little shuffle, hopefully get that on the time-lapse. I'll set up the time-lapse camera, but first of all I'll dig up these parsnips, see what the crop's like. My parents normally do really well with parsnips, even though the leaves don't look that big at the moment. There's probably going to be some really nice big fat roots under there because they've got sandy soil, and sandy soil is pretty much the best soil you can get when it comes to root crops because there's nothing in the way for the roots to grow, so you get nice big straight parsnips or carrots. So that's all the parsnips now dug up. This is probably about the average size of what we normally get for our parsnips, which is really quite large, probably bigger than you see in the average shop. We have had a lot bigger than this though. These are by no means the biggest we've ever grown. Definitely grown much larger in the past. This one here is a very good size actually, even though it's not that long. It's a really big thick one, and there's a few kind of smaller ones in between. But typically here in this garden we tend to grow really nice big parsnips. The parsnips don't seem to mind our cooler weather. They seem to enjoy the long daylight hours in the summer, and they grow quite well. So I'll definitely be sowing more parsnips this year for my parents' garden. But for now, that's all the parsnips I got from this plot. We can use them over the next few weeks. We'll keep a few inside. The rest we'll probably just put in some sand or compost, keep them moist and cold, stop them from growing. So we don't want them to dry out and go over too quickly. So next I'm going to start digging over the plot, removing all the material and the weeds, and probably getting a rotavator to rotovate it just to speed it up. It doesn't need double dug. We do the double digging generally when the potatoes are dug up. Potatoes are currently in that plot over there, so they only gets double dug about once every 4 years. But every year what we do is we either fork over the top the first 1 foot, or now I've got a rotavator, I can rotovate the first 1 foot of the soil as well. So as you can see from the time lapse, that's the site now cleared of weeds and debris. I've now spread out the manure evenly over the surface. I've also put on some ash to help with the acidity, and I've also spread out bloodfish and bone. Now we do actually need more ash, but we've actually run out of our supply of ash, so I'll probably add to that later on, but it is best if you can dig into the soil as much as possible. So what I'm going to do now is leave it overnight. There's quite a few worms in the manure. There's also quite a lot of worms in the soil. I don't want to chop all the worms up with the rotavator, so leaving it overnight, what that will do is the worms will go underground because it's cold at the moment at this time of year. It's currently the beginning of March. Last night was -2 or 3, so tonight it's supposed to get cold again. The worms will go deeper underground during cold nights, and then when they're deep underground during the morning time, they'll be less likely to be chopped up by the rotavator. And I'm just going to go lightly over the surface with the rotavator. So I'll leave it tonight, come back in the morning, give it some rotavating, and get it nicely mixed in. If it was going to be windy, or if I was going to be leaving it a long time, I would dig in the bloodfish and bone and the ash to stop it blowing away. But because the soil is so damp, and it's supposed to be quite frosty tonight and not windy. The material is not going to get blown away, but otherwise I would recommend you put that on just before digging it over. Otherwise it will probably get blown away, or you could get rodents or foxes digging in it as well. So these are the brassicas that I'll be planting in that plot soon, but if I put them in at the moment as they are, because of all the slugs and snails that we have in the garden, and pigeons as well, they probably just get eaten. So what I tend to do is I grow them on from seedlings and then plant them out. You can direct sow, but most of these are F1 hybrid seeds and they're quite expensive, so if I was just to sow all the seeds out, most would probably get eaten, and that would be a waste of quite expensive seeds. The other reason is because we have clubroot in our soil. These plants, if they get in contact with the soil when they're quite young, the clubroot will start straight away, and that will mean that they'll get the infection and it will stunt them from a very young age. Whereas if you give them a head start in fresh compost that's not from an infected source, and you grow them on as large as you can before you put them in the infected soil, you've got a much better chance of the plant doing well. Because once it's at a larger size, it can tolerate the clubroot infection a lot better. So what we've got here, we've got red cabbage in the front tray, we've got cauliflower in the back, and we've got some white cabbage as well on the left here. I'm going to be sowing a lot more soon. This is just what I've got at the moment in the polytunnel protected, but I'll be growing a lot more, planting them out, so that'll be the next stage. So once I've got the mulch on top of the soil, I'll then be able to plant these out once they're a little bit bigger. So we'll grow these in here for a few more weeks, then they'll go into 9cm pots for probably another 2 or 3 weeks, and then after that these plants will be going into the plot. So the plot just needs to be mulched now to stop any weeds coming up, as at the moment there's quite a few weeds. I was wanting to film this last bit on the actual plot, but a storm suddenly rolled in, so it's really windy and the microphone doesn't cope well with the windy weather. So the plot's nice and even now. I'll show you a couple of photos at the end how it looks, and it's ready for planting. Just need to put a mulch on the surface. And the reason we mulch is it keeps the moisture in, stops the weeds. That's probably one of the biggest advantages, and also when the mulch breaks down, it adds to the organic content of the soil. So I'm not sure what mulch we use this year. Quite often we use seaweed or wood chips. Just depends what's available really. Quite often we use hedge clippings as well. If I've mulched that before this video goes up, I'll put that in now at the end of the video, and I'll also put in a photo of the plot just before it was mulched.